It's that time of the year again. GMTK 2024 Game Jam is here.
And this year, they gave us not one, not two, but 4 days to work your ass off on a game that mentally breaks you, only to throw it in the trash. This time, the theme was
built to scale.
Now, me being a dumbass, didn't really understand what the theme actually signified, so I decided to make a game about scaling a hill. However, the main priority of the game was to get my friend Krish into the game. I first took a 3D scan of my friend using the Polyscan app, which is honestly very weird because you kind of have to do this creepy 360-degree scan of the person, which is really awkward in public, but me being me didn't really care. I then brought the model into Blender where I sculpted all imperfections in the mesh and also decimated the model in order to reduce the polygons so that it becomes mobile friendly. I then exported the model as an FBX and made sure to export all the textures separately. I then brought the file into Mixamo because it's the holy grail for beginner animators. I then proceeded to download some basic animations like run, idle, jump, etc. I also wanted to use some other goofy animations, but unfortunately ran out of time. Now, the basic idea was an endless runner similar to Temple Run. However, I wasn't sure about how I would go about making the game an infinite run, which is why I used a material shader made by Mercenary Camp in his tutorial for an endless runner. So yeah, big thanks to him. I will now explain the code behind the game, so feel free to skip this part if it gets boring. I first called the position of the player using a variable called player, which I then put into the update function. So the player would move forward in the Z direction every time the update function was called. I created a player mode script where I declared public variables like run speed, sideways speed, gravity, and also calling the character controller as well as the animator components. I used a boolean to check if the game is paused, which is set to true on start, which is basically the home screen, and also made sure that when it is false, it calls the update mode function. I created several states using inheritance such as game state, initial state, and death state, where if the player dies, I reset the player to the origin and also changes the state of the game to initial state. Now, for the world generation, I used a platform called chunks. I first created a list for the chunks called chunk pool. I then created a spawn function which picks a random index from the list and then spawns the chunk. I used the peak function to find the last chunk that was generated in the scene and then despawned it if the camera had reached a certain distance. In the sliding state, I divided the height of the character controller by 2 so that we don't collide with objects while sliding. So yeah. In terms of bugs, I faced this one really annoying bug where the player just starts gliding over the chunks. I cannot tell you what a headache this bug was because I had to recheck my entire code and wasted several hours trying to find out what the problem was, only to realize that all I had to do was to turn off the has exit time button for the animation. It was time for the obstacles, so I just quickly searched through Sketchfab for some Indian obstacles and found this beauty which said, "After whiskey, driving is risky." So we knew we had to get that, so I smashed the download button. I then also needed a celebrity appearance in my game, so I thought, who better than the great Virat Kohli? I placed him as an Easter egg in the scenery, so if you do find him in the game, then big respect. I also made sure to take inspiration from the surroundings by adding an Indian flag which was lying in my house, and also the clean toilet, which is quite similar to mine, except mine actually has shit in it. I then began designing the start page by placing a few palm trees and cows. I then moved on to designing the scenery by adding various items. Finally, it was time for the chunks, where I then began placing obstacles for the chunks in annoying positions because, the whole point is for the game to be hard. I also created a layer for the player to die, So as soon as he collided with one of the obstacles, he would go into this dead state. I also made sure to adjust the collider box just enough so that the game is at least playable.
So now in this so-called Rajasthan, I realized that the people needed to trade a mode of payment.
A currency. And I realized that the Indian currency wasn't gonna cut it. So I just cut my body in half and made Y coins with a little goofy ass animation. Now in order to make a 3D model for the currency, I used a AI generating 3D modeler, which I then put my picture and created a 3D model of me using AI, and it was the currency for the game. Yep, as you can clearly see, it came out quite beautiful. I then brought it into the game file and then started adding colliders and then adjusting it. After which I also had to do some texturing so that the coins actually move along with the field, like as in the ground. So yeah, I had to create like a complete shader graph for that as well. And here's the code for the coins. I then did some lighting adjustments using basic colors and also changed the pipeline to universal. No, I'm not sure which pipeline I used, I forgot. Anyway, I then began to set up the UI for the game, where I just used like very basic text and fonts, and I also added this sick revive button, which is just a picture of me and has like a loading period around the circle. Yeah. I then created the logo for the game using another Adobe AI tool because I was too lazy and I was also running out of time at this point. Out of the 48 hours, I think around an hour was left while I was doing this. Yeah. Scalar gel in its finest yellow color. For those of you wondering what happened to the previous game, which was the one which has a trailer, Bunty's Catharsis is still taking a lot of time, and big shout out to Shlok for helping me with the voices. And this is just a view of the Blender file, which was one of the animations I created.
So, what about the future of the game? Well, I decided to add a character selection, and other than that, I think I'm going to just release it on the Play Store and the App Store, unless, well, Apple's being really annoying by making it 8K per year. So I will see. And yeah, the results are in. The game placed 2,794, I think, overall in terms of entertainment.
The game was also reviewed by developer Ezra, a famous YouTuber, which makes me happy. And he found it hard to play the game, but in the end he figured it out and he gave me 5 stars, so I'm extremely happy about that.